Have you ever heard of sore losers? For some, it could be a frown, a tantrum, and for others, a display of envy. But for these three young men, it was 12 gunshots at the winner, taking turns with her body and throwing her in the lake behind an abandoned warehouse. The night began, like most others, for the three friends, Craig Peter, Gabriel Martin, and Jaden Benjamin. Three restless souls carved out of the streets and stitched together by their love and desire for trouble. Craig Peter, the oldest at 24, was the leader. Quick-witted and with a sharp tongue, he was a master manipulator. He was handsome and had the easy charm of a confident young man. He was the rich kid, the spoiled brat. His father was well-connected in town and he was used to getting everything he wanted. Gabriel, at 23, was the silent storm. He was a brooding figure who let his fists do the talking. His friends called him the Scorpion for his quiet rage. And then there was Jaden, the youngest at 21. He didn't do the talking or the punching, but he was the one with ideas of how to get in and out of trouble. He was the smart one, and although he never caused trouble, he never stepped aside too. One thing that created a sick bond between the three friends was first their penchant for breaking the law. Gabriel Martin was 16 when he first felt what it was like to have the cold steel cuffs against his wrists. The crime? Armed robbery. But like most things in Gabriel's life, the story wasn't as straightforward as it seemed. It started with a dare, a reckless challenge from a group of older boys in his neighborhood. Gabriel, always eager to prove himself, had taken it without a second thought. Life at home wasn't easy. His father had never been home, and his mother didn't have the time to keep watch over him either. Forged from years of wanting to be noticed, Gabriel became rebellious and would do anything to spite his seemingly perfect parents. The older neighborhood boys saw that desperation and used it. They told Gabriel about a convenience store at the edge of town, a place with a careless owner who didn't believe in banks. The cash register was always full, they said, and the safe in the back was an easy score. Gabriel's job was simple: stand lookout while they handled the rest. Gabriel didn't need the money, but he needed the thrill. Without questioning, he agreed. The store's owner wasn't the frail old man they described, but a former Marine who kept a loaded shotgun behind the counter. When the boys pulled out a pistol and demanded the cash, the owner didn't hesitate to shoot. By the time the police arrived, Gabriel was still rooted to the spot, clutching the stolen pistol the boys had shoved into his hands for the night. He was the only one they caught that night. Gabriel spent the next 2 years in juvenile prison. He became a leader among the other detainees through violence and sheer force of will. By the time he was released at 18, he wasn't the same naive boy who had taken that fateful dare. Gabriel's time in juvie had hardened him. The boy within him had died, giving birth to a cold and murderous young man. Craig Peter, on the other hand, was just 13 when he was arrested for assaulting a minor, though, for a long time, he tried to convince himself, and anyone who would listen, that it had been something else entirely. It happened during the summer, the same summer his parents had split, leaving him to fend for himself in a neighborhood where trouble was the only thing available. His mother, too overwhelmed by the divorce, was busy with her own life. Craig learned quickly that if you wanted something, you had to take it. That was the way things worked. He had noticed her one evening at the park, a girl a little younger than him, maybe 10 or 12. She wasn't with anyone, sitting alone by the swings. Craig had approached her, bored, and offered to push her on the swing. At first, she'd been shy, unsure. But Craig had a way of getting people to drop their guard. Before long, they were talking, and then they were laughing. One thing led to another, and Craig found himself alone with her in the darkened corner of the park. What started as innocent fun quickly took a darker turn. He was bigger, stronger, and in his mind, the power he had over her felt like a game. He molested her over and over again. When it was over, he tried to tell himself it had been something she wanted too, that she had led him on, even if he knew deep down that wasn't true. The next day, it all came crashing down. The girl's parents had found out. Word spread fast, as it always did in their neighborhood, and before Craig knew it, the police were knocking at his door. He tried to play it off, claiming that it was all a misunderstanding. He told them she had consented, that it had been her idea, and that he hadn't done anything wrong. But the evidence was glaring. The girl's story was different. Her parents were frantic, the authorities involved, and no matter how Craig tried to twist his words, it didn't matter. He was arrested. As for Jaden Benjamin, he'd always been the quiet type at school. He wasn't the one who started trouble, but he sure knew how to finish it. He had beaten and bruised his cousin at such a young age that his parents took him for therapy, but he never honored the appointment to the end. Over time, Jaden learned to hide his dark nature from his family and everyone around him. To the world, he was the perfect boy, but behind closed doors, he was a monster. These three broken souls met online, strangers at first, each searching for something to call their own. Craig, Gabriel, and Jaden connected over a shared love for music, street dancing, and the kind of reckless freedom that only existed in the dark streets after curfew. Over time, the messages turned into real plans. They met in the streets, bonding over magic and dancing wildly. They made videos and became internet sensations. Soon they were winning street dance competitions, becoming known among local crews for their unique style and untamed personalities. People started talking about them, and they loved the attention. They spent nights together, drinking, smoking, and dancing, until they couldn't feel their feet anymore. They basked in the chaos, in the freedom of not caring about anything except the music and the adrenaline. Shortly, the three of them became inseparable. But this isn't a story of friendship between three broken young men. It is a story of the deepest forms of human cruelty. It is a tale of death and survival, and the true depths of evil. It all started one day, when a message came through. It came like the usual invitation. Someone had heard about them, about their raw talent and the wild energy they brought to the streets. There was a dance battle later that night in town, and they couldn't miss it. It was another night for them to take the center stage. And that is when Samantha Young came into the story. Little did Samantha know that an invitation to a street dance battle from a mutual friend named Miranda Jones would change everything. At first, Samantha thought of declining. She wasn't in the mood for crowds or the energy of the floor. But then she had a rough day at work, and dance had always been her way of relaxing. When Miranda mentioned the cash, it was a perfect reason for her to leave her couch. That night, the underground parking lot was not just another battleground. It was where her path would cross with the three boys who would forever alter the course of her life. The night was cold and the parking lot was filled up. Music boomed from a beat-up speaker, and the crowd gathered, murmuring with excitement. This wasn't just any dance battle, it was a fight for respect, for street credibility. In this world where reputation meant everything, tonight would be the night that defined them. The first round came and Gabriel was introduced with all his amazing wins and popularity, but Samantha wasn't intimidated. She had just moved into the small town, but she was a great dancer too, and she knew this. The first hip-hop beat dropped, and her body moved fluidly, effortlessly, as if she'd become one with the music. Her movements were smooth, and yet full of raw emotion. She hit every beat with perfect timing, her legs spinning, her arms moving to the music. One after the other, Samantha Young stunned the crowd into silence by beating not just one, but all three of the town's best dancers, Gabriel, Craig, and Jaden. The crowd went wild, chanting her name. Samantha stood still, her chest heaving, sweat dripping down her face. She had done it. She had beaten them all. The trophy was a cash prize of $500. But to her, it meant something far bigger. It meant respect, recognition, and victory in a world where she had tons of competition. But as she held the money in her hand, she couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. Samantha would later confess of the dark emotions she felt that night, and little did she know that what felt like triumph now would soon be the reason for her doom. The dance battle might have been over, but the true battle had just begun. The dance show was over as she walked toward her car. She didn't notice the three boys approaching from behind. They had been watching her, waiting for the moment when her guard would drop. "Hey, that was some crazy stuff back there," Craig called out, his voice loud and boisterous. "You've got moves, girl." Samantha turned, still catching her breath, and smiled. "Thanks," she said, feeling a bit of pride swell inside her. She wasn't used to this kind of attention, but it felt good to be recognized for her hard work. The boys praised her and offered to meet her up some other day so they could learn new moves off each other. Samantha nodded eagerly. She had learned so much that night, and the idea of learning from them, of becoming even better, excited her. "I'd like that," she said, her voice light with enthusiasm. She was innocent and she felt comfortable in their presence. But suddenly, Gabriel made an offer. "How about you drop us off at home, and we promise to tell you about the next big concert?" It was dark, and they claimed their ride was going to run late. Samantha hesitated, but only for a moment. They seemed harmless enough. Just three guys who shared a passion for dance, right? She had nothing to fear. They were just three dancers, and she already felt some sort of comradeship, because they all loved dancing. She unlocked the car door and slid into the driver's seat, and the boys followed. The drive was quiet at first. Samantha's fingers drummed lightly on the steering wheel. She still had a wide smile on her face, gloating over her victory minutes ago. Then, without warning, Gabriel pulled out a handgun and pressed it against her temple. "Drive," he commanded coldly. Samantha's heart slammed against her chest. She couldn't understand what was happening. She turned her head to look at them, but all she saw were three faces, cold and lacking empathy. Without thinking, she stepped on the brakes. Terror gripped her. She didn't know what they wanted, but she couldn't breathe. "Please," she stammered, her voice breaking. But they ordered her to drive on, or they'd finish her off in the car. The street was dark, and the gun was too close to her. She couldn't scream for help without risking her life. Frightened, Samantha drove on. Jaden kept telling her where to turn, what bend to make, and she obeyed, broken with fear. The car sped through the dark streets, and soon they were out of the city, heading to the outskirts, where the buildings grew sparse, and it was very lonely and secluded. She didn't know where they were going, but she felt a growing sense of dread settle in her stomach. When they arrived, the old warehouse was completely dark. Abandoned years ago by a paper mill, the place was now nothing more than a crumbling and deserted structure. Jaden had picked the perfect spot for a murder. Quiet, out of range, and without witnesses. But would they just end her life for a dance battle? Were they such sore losers? Samantha's hands trembled as she stepped out of the car, shaking in fear. "Please, just take the money and leave me alone," she begged, her voice hoarse with panic. "I don't want any trouble." But Gabriel only grinned, stepping closer to her. "You think we want money? Nah. We want more than that." Craig sneered darkly at her. "You think you're some kind of hero for beating us? You're nothing." He spat coldly. She tried to back away, but they were too fast, too strong. Craig grabbed her from behind, pinning her arms, while Jaden and Gabriel circled her like predators. Samantha cried, tears streaming down her face, but they didn't listen. They didn't care. And even as she begged, her voice breaking with fear and pain, they overpowered her, and taking turns they abused and assaulted her over and over again. They didn't stop. Not when she cried. Not when she begged. For her, the night that had started as a celebration of triumph turned into a nightmare that would haunt her forever. In that moment, she realized the victory she had felt, so fleeting, so innocent, was the very thing that had sealed her fate. When the three were done, Samantha lay curled on the cold, cracked, concrete floor of the abandoned warehouse, her body a mass of pain and blood. Her clothes were torn, the fabric shredded, clinging to her skin in the most agonizing way. Blood stained the ground beneath her, and she could feel the warmth of it dripping down her thighs. Her breathing came in shallow gasps. Her ribcage was broken, and her body bruised. She had never been touched by a man before. The boys, the three of them, had shattered her life and stolen her innocence. But just when Samantha thought they'd leave her there, to bleed out, they proved how inhuman they were. The true heights of their cruelty was revealed. Gabriel disappeared into the shadows of the warehouse, returning moments later with thick ropes. He held them up, his eyes glinting with a dark satisfaction. Samantha was too broken, too in shock, too scared to comprehend their plans. Weakly, she begged, her voice barely a whisper, but Gabriel's face remained cold. "I'm not going back to jail for anyone," he muttered, the words filled with deadly determination. Samantha's heart raced as they got closer, trying to bind her and throw her into the trunk of her car. She was broken, in pain, and completely ashamed. And though her spirit was broken, she summoned every ounce of strength she had left. In a desperate act of defiance, she wrenched her arms free, scrambling to her feet, and ran away from them. She had to escape. But it was too late. Gabriel pulled out his handgun and pointed it at her. Without hesitation, he fired. The first bullet ripped through her shoulder, sending a sharp, searing pain through her body. The second bullet struck her side, and then another in her leg. Each one landed with brutal precision. 12 shots in total, each one tearing through her flesh, each one pushing her closer to death. Finally, her legs buckled beneath her, and she collapsed to the floor, her vision fading. Blood pooled around her, but she lay still, pretending to be dead, hoping that somehow it would be enough to save her. The boys picked up her broken body like discarded trash. They dragged her to the lake behind the warehouse, tossing her in as if she were nothing more than a discarded object. Then they took her car and drove off, leaving her to die in the water. But Samantha didn't die. Her body, battered and broken, fought to survive. She gasped for air, her lungs burning with each desperate breath. She clawed at the water, pulling herself to the surface, refusing to give in to the darkness that beckoned to her. If anything will be learnt in this cruel, heart-wrenching story, it is that Samantha Young is a survivor. She fought death itself and decided to live through the combat. As fate would have it, two couples were parked near the lake. When they saw Samantha's bloodied, lifeless form, they rushed to her, pulling her from the water. They drove her to the nearest hospital, where she was immediately rushed into surgery. By morning, after 2 surgeries, Samantha was still breathing, still alive, a true survivor. The pain was unbearable, but she had made it. The report of Samantha's survival spread quickly. News of her incredible will to live, despite the brutality she had endured, reached the ears of law enforcement. Though barely able to stand, she was escorted to a hospital room where her story began to unravel. Detective Gendry Berling, a seasoned investigator with a history investigating gender-based crime and assault, was assigned to her case. He had seen a lot in his career, but nothing like this. The severity of her injuries, the way she had been discarded, left a scar on his heart. Gendry sat across from her, his eyes searching for the truth, but there was no need to ask her to repeat the story. He had already read her medical reports. The sheer brutality of it left him stunned. Never in his years as a detective had he seen such cruelty. He swore to himself then that he would bring her justice. Despite Samantha's pain, she had the courage to speak, and Gendry made sure her story was heard. Gabriel, Craig, and Jaden had been apprehended 2 days after the attack. They were questioned one by one, but their words were lies, filled with arrogance. They claimed that they didn't know Samantha. Their denials seemed rehearsed, their words already planned. Gabriel and Craig had faced the harshness of the law, and they had no intentions of going there again. As the investigations dragged on, the boys continued in denial, but the evidence was becoming glaring. They had stolen Samantha's car. People had seen them leave the dance with her. The investigators had all the pieces. They just needed the truth. It was only when they could no longer lie, when the cracks in their stories became too wide to cover, that they admitted it. They finally settled with the lie that Samantha had consented. They had no choice but to say so, as if this feeble lie would absolve them of their actions. Detective Gendry Berling refused to be swayed. He wasn't interested in their lies, and he wasn't going to let them get away with it. After getting the descriptions from Samantha, Gendry took a trip to the warehouse where the crime had occurred, and what he found there confirmed his worst fears. Bullet casings scattered across the floor, remnants of rope that had been used to bind her. With every piece of evidence, Gendry's resolve grew stronger. He knew the truth now, even if they tried to deny it. This wasn't just a tragic accident or a crime by some young lads. No, it was a planned act of cruelty. And the perpetrators had a history. They had done this before, in different ways, but never so openly, never with such recklessness. Their backgrounds showed a pattern of violence that had been fostered over the years. Gendry was determined to ensure they faced the consequences. Despite Gabriel's father's wealth and influence, who tried to cover up the crime, Gendry found a way to get Samantha a good lawyer, one who would fight for her and not let the boys escape their punishment. The day of the trial arrived. Samantha, though fragile and scarred, stood tall in the courtroom, a symbol of strength despite everything she had endured. Gabriel and Craig, defiant and arrogant, pleaded not guilty. Jaden, however, the weakest of the three, was the first to crack. He couldn't carry the weight of his guilt any longer. In a moment of desperation, he pleaded guilty, hoping that would somehow lessen his sentence. But the truth could not be erased, and the judge made his ruling. Gabriel and Craig were sentenced to life imprisonment for their crimes. Jaden, too, was condemned, though his plea for mercy did little to save him from the gravity of his actions. All boys would spend the rest of their lives behind bars. Samantha had finally received justice. But this is not simply a story of a dance competition or three troubled young men. This is a tale of human cruelty, a harsh reminder of the darkness that can lie within the human soul. It is a tale of how violence, when fed and bred, could destroy not only the lives of its victims, but also the lives of those who inflict it. And so, the gavel has been struck and justice has been served. But at what cost? Samantha's body would heal, but the scars of that night would never truly fade. So, if you asked, how far can a sore loser go? How far can a man's ego drive him to evil? Here is your answer. Thank you for tuning in. If you'd like to catch up on more chilling true crime stories, kindly subscribe to our channel. Don't forget to hit the notification bell to ensure you never miss a new story.